Good evening and welcome to the channel's studios here in London with your international news around the world in 5. Anti-Kremlin armed groups are urging civilians to evacuate from Russian border regions ahead of massive strikes a day ahead of the country's general election.
A special liberation operation was launched by the United Forces of Russian Volunteer Units.
The Freedom of Russia Legion, Russian Volunteer Corps and the Siberian Battalion, Ukraine-based militias purportedly made up of Russian fighters, have called on local officials to immediately announce evacuations from Kursk and Belgorod. It comes after several attacks on oil refineries. Civilians should not suffer from the war, the groups said in a joint statement. It comes as voting starts in the country's general election, widely seen as stage-managed, with no serious contenders apart from President Vladimir Putin. US Secretary of State Antony Blinken has said Israel needs to open as many land crossings into Gaza as possible, noting that shipments into northern Gaza began this week through a crossing known as the 96th Gate. President Joe Biden last week announced plans for the US military to set up a dock on Gaza's Mediterranean coast that will enable distribution of up to 2 million meals a day into Gaza. Aid agencies say 5 months of war between Israel and Hamas has driven much of the population there to the brink of famine.
When established, this corridor will enable the distribution of up to 2 million meals every single day, as well as medicine, water, and other critical humanitarian supplies. Germany, Greece, Italy, the Netherlands, Canada are also supporting this effort.
The US House of Representatives has passed a landmark bill that could see TikTok banned in America. It would give the social media giant's Chinese ByteDance 6 months to sell its controlling stake, or the app would be blocked in the US. While the bill passed overwhelmingly in a bipartisan vote, it still needs to clear the Senate and be signed by the president to become law. Lawmakers have long held concerns about China's influence over TikTok. The UK's Community Minister Michael Gove has unveiled a new definition of extremism as the promotion or advancement of violence, hatred or intolerance. He says the new definition will help the government choose its friends wisely, but he declined to say whether alleged comments from Conservative donor Frank Hester about Diane Abbott would meet the new definition. Groups covered by the definition will be denied access to taxpayer funding and prevented from meeting ministers and officials.
The proposed definition will hold that extremism is the promotion or advancement of an ideology based on violence, hatred or intolerance that aims to negate or destroy the fundamental rights and freedoms of others, or undermine, overturn or replace the UK's system of liberal parliamentary democracy and democratic rights, or intentionally create a permissive environment for others to achieve these results.
The Dutch anti-Islam populist leader Geert Wilders has abandoned his bid to become Prime Minister despite his party's dramatic victory in the 2023 election. "I can only become Prime Minister if all parties in the coalition support it. That was not the case," he wrote on X, formerly known as Twitter. His Freedom Party won the most votes last year but needed support of other parties to form a coalition. Talks continue with 3 other parties on the shape of a new government. Some Sudanese residents cut off from mobile networks for weeks due to war between rival military factions are using Starlink satellite connections to access the internet as regular coverage starts to return to other parts of the country. The mobile blackout that began in early February has prevented people from buying essential goods, including scarce supplies of food, and from keeping in touch with displaced relatives. In the Karari district of Omdurman, Sudan's army has provided satellite access to residents. People crowded around a Starlink access point to connect on their mobile phones with relatives and loved ones. And major African cocoa plants in Ivory Coast and Ghana have stopped or cut processing because they cannot afford to buy beans, 4 trading sources said, meaning chocolate prices around the world are likely to soar. Chocolate makers have already increased prices to consumers after 3 years of poor cocoa harvests, with a 4th expected in the 2 countries that produce nearly 60% of the world's cocoa. Cocoa prices have more than doubled over the last year, scaling numerous all-time highs. And that's your international news around the world in 5. Now back to the channel's studios in Lagos.